So guys, following that fascinating conversation, we know the challenges that we have here in South Africa, and this panel discussion is very much going to be a panel discussion. It's going to be organic. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You're all very passionate about what you do in your own industries, but creating the future. And Will was just telling us the challenges and the evolving world and the technological tsunami that's coming our way. The artificial intelligence, the digital platforms, and it all comes back to what Nelson Mandela said, that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And the challenge that we face in this country is that unemployment, and there shouldn't be unemployment in this country because we've got amazing companies like BCX, we've got amazing technologies, we've got these platforms, but to have an unemployment rate of 27.7%, that's according to the last statistics. And if you delve into that even further, that the youth that are sitting under the age of 25 years old, the unemployment rate is sitting at 67.4% in this country. So what do we do? How do we create the future? What do we need to do to harness this amazing technology, to harness this incredible technology around us to become globally competitive? You want to start off with this? How do we do it, Ian?
Sure, it's a great question. It's a huge question. And we've talked a lot today about the relevance of coding, the relevance of changing the educational system. But we've got to go right across the place. It's not just about giving the children more content. It's giving the teachers more skills to be able to use the content that they've got and use the technology that we now have available to distribute that content. It's about understanding whether the content is relevant and how we continue to embrace and change the ecosystem that the educationalists themselves must live in. And the conversation we had yesterday was it's also up to us as parents and as leaders of our community to embrace and help the children come through those changes. We shouldn't stand back and say it's somebody else's job. We've actually really got to lean in and be prepared to make a difference.
Yeah. Malcolm, welcome to South Africa. It's not your first visit. Welcome, and we're looking really forward to your session tomorrow. It's an interesting topic, and you deal a lot with these challenges. You talk about the tipping point. You talk about the formula that needs to happen for that disruption to take place. From your point of view, when you look at the countries and you look at this continent in particular, what needs to happen to create the future? What's the fundamentals that need to change for us to adopt this change and get the buy-in from business and the leaders around us?
It is an impossibly broad and difficult question. But if I might nibble off one little piece of it, I wonder whether we have fully exploited the possibilities of globalism. So I remember once I was having a chat with somebody who was telling me that there is a town in Mexico whose town council and mayor live in New York City. They were immigrants to New York, and they fly back however many times, 6, 7 times a year. It's not that expensive to fly these days. And they bring their expertise and their money and what have you from America, and they reconnect with their people back home, and then they fly back to America and do their jobs. And I've thought about that a lot, and it strikes me very much as a model of the way that people will move, the way that movement will happen in the next generation or so. And if we can encourage that, the productive uses of those kinds of cross-border movements, that's a way of spreading knowledge and wealth and all kinds of things that I think could be of enormous benefit to places like this. I think we have to stop thinking about this country or any other country as a place whose interests stop at their own borders.
Okay, interesting. Rapelang, this runs through your blood. This is your passion, and I loved your talk this morning, and you really touched on this, and this is your passion. And I really hope that your message really has spread to so many people here today. But from your point of view, what do we need to ignite the future and really shift and create the future that we want?
I think the biggest area for us to focus on is really around how we develop people going forward. I think our current educational systems, training environments are really not conducive to the kind of skills that we're going to need in the future. And I mean, we talk a lot about some of these things. Future thinking styles like empathy or ability to think in a big picture, or and the like, and growth mindset and grit and initiative and all of these things. But if you think about it quite deeply, most of us don't truly understand how we develop for those skills, how we measure for those skills. And when I think about how we're going to capture this huge population of young unemployed people, we need to think differently about how we're going to develop them, because right now they're going into educational systems that are transferring content and knowledge. They're not really shifting mindsets to be able to trigger some of those abilities. And until people can shift from being dependents to independence to and build greater agency, we actually won't know how to capture that youth dividend that we keep talking about. So I think the biggest questions we have to ask ourselves is, are we measuring the right intelligences? And do we need do we need to be focusing on a different kind of intelligence? Maybe we should simply be trying to look at how well people can respond to the tasks and challenges that hit them in their personal lives and their work lives. And there's something there to be explored around how we measure that and how we build for it, as opposed to measuring CVs or degrees or sort of where you worked as abilities or indicators of capacity. And I think for me, that's the biggest area we have to focus on. There's a whole other area of non-knowledge skills that we haven't quite begin to understand and unpack in enough detail for us as coaches, as leaders, as parents to even know how to develop.
Fascinating. And by the way, folks, the hashtag for the conference is hashtag BCX Disrupt. So if you've got a question you want to ask the panel, I'm following you guys. I'm on to all of you, and I'll pop the question up to the panelists up here. But if I had to make will.i.am Minister of Change for the continent of Africa, what would you start off by changing?
I'm voting.
Well, change is a hard word, and that's the wrong thing that's the last thing I would use to describe. Minister of Start is better, because with starting, you're not trying to change anything, you're just birthing new things. And that is encouragement, educating differently, and in and around new tools like blockchain and artificial intelligence. But I wouldn't change anything. That's scary to people. People don't want change. People want fresh, people want new. And with new, you just have to ignore old. But that's not change, though. That's new.
Yeah. Mike, I mean, this is something that you're very passionate about as well. With your days at Success Factors, you're now a BCX director. How do you bring about this change? Because you brought it up on a corporate level, but how do you bring it up from the bottom up and change an entire country?
So I think there's a perspective here which says companies need to get out of the way of the future. And what do I mean by that is that the future is in our homes already. So all this stuff companies are talking about and making a noise about, digitization, AI, bots, people are using it every day. You talk to Siri, you talk to Alexa, you have AI when you get recommendations to buy something. You've digitized your music and all of that in the home. And then what do we do in corporate life? CIOs take note. We bring all these really innovative, leading-edge people to work, and we make them go back 50 years in technology. So I think the best way to embrace the future is for corporates to figure out how not to do that and to let the future happen and not push people back all the time.
Yeah. But you know what's interesting? When you look at countries like China, when you look at Singapore, when you look at what's happening in India at the moment, if you look at the correlation with the growth that they're having in those countries, it's all about leadership. The question is, do we have the right leadership? And how important is leadership, Malcolm, in all of this, in starting this revolution, in this big change and shifting the mindset? It has to boil down to leadership, from the government up, right down to the CEOs that are in this very room. It has to start with leadership, doesn't it?
Yes, although that doesn't tell us much, because it leaves all kinds of questions on the table, like what kind of leader?
Yes.
And that, in turn, begs another question, which is not just what kind of leader, but what kind of leader when? So the thing that's clearest to me is that different times require different kinds of leaders, right? That what you needed in wartime in England is very different from what you needed in 1946 after the war was over.
Yeah.
And we can come up with many, many different, we can do versions of that here in South Africa.
Don't let us get started about that.
Yes. So that's the first question, and it makes, we really need to define first what we want and need, and then ask the question of what sort of leader we're looking for.
Yeah. Well, BCX is putting their money where their mouth is. You guys are developing, you're nurturing this content. It's something that you believe in, and it's something that you're filtering down to the companies that support you. So you've got that leadership ability to drive this force. Are you seeing this emerging in other organizations that, customers of yours, political will? Is there the political will in this country to enforce the change?
I think the leadership needs to come from many, many parts, and I think that's part of our challenge. And it's not just top-down either. I mean, leadership can come from anywhere. And if you look at a lot of the innovation and the smaller companies that have been created, they've not come from CEOs, they've not come from ministers. They've come bottom-up and through organic change. One of the things that we're trying to do with BCX Disrupt and the series of events thereafter from this is almost create more of a movement around disruption, and more of a movement and an agility in our country to change things and make things happen. I think that's what we need to do. Like-minded people, thinking the same way, trying to get on and get shit done.
Yeah. So, Rapelang, do you find that there are challenges when you want to take what you do and broaden the spectrum and say, hey guys, come on board, let's do this? Do you find it a constant resistance that you have to keep begging and keep getting people to understand what you're trying to do? That's the challenge I'm talking about, and that's where leaders don't see the future the way you do.
Definitely not. And there's a lot of challenges when you're trying to grow a small business and you're trying to sell services into companies or public sector. And I found in my experience that there's often very few people in a company that are actually willing to assess new innovative products from first principles and determine for themselves if it will suit the environment and if they can purchase. And we're still stuck in very traditional ways of engaging with new products, where you want to take it through traditional procurement channels, or do you have three existing customers when it's supposed to be a new innovation? And we need to question whether the leadership or the sort of people or senior people in those roles are actually have the agency to explore some of that thing. And sometimes it's a question of structure in the organization. I like to think of leadership as two things that are often quite contradictory. And I believe it is a commitment to the best we now know, but it is also, leadership is also a commitment to anything that improves the best we now know. And if our leaders are not actively looking for that way to improve the best we now know and apply it in our organizations, we do fall short and we don't connect with the startups and the innovations that are happening in our environment.
Yeah. Mike, do you want to add to that? And Will, I'm going to come to you next in terms of the important role that leadership has to play in this incredible change.
So I think there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing here, and I think actually innovation is more important. So innovation begets leadership, and strong innovation with weak leadership can survive. Strong leadership with weak innovation will not survive. And I think the real issue is to really create an environment which spurns and engenders innovation at all levels in society and in a country. And I think that in itself will develop and create the right leadership. And if you look at the global corporations which lead today, they have come from leadership. The 40% of the Fortune 500 won't be around in the next 5 years. Innovation will create new leaders.
Well, is it a leadership thing, or does it have to come from people like yourself and your foundation that you invest so much money in it, that you spark and you innovate and you nurture talent, or does it have to be this buy-in from right across the board?
For this continent?
Yeah.
You would have to, you got to look at it differently. And it's birthing. You look at Africa as a seed, and you birth it, and you birth companies and people that have means need to come together and create a new type of birthing mechanism to bring about new leaders and new entrepreneurs to create huge companies. And it doesn't look like America's growth. It doesn't look like China's growth. So China, to work in China, it's the reason why Facebook's not in China. It has to have some type of government connection. It's the reason why Twitter or Google, for everything that's in China, there's the Chinese version of Google, the Chinese version of Facebook, the Chinese version of Twitter, because China is different than America. So Africa has to be different than all of them. So the thing is, you can't borrow from America to have an African success. You can't borrow from China to have African success. You have to birth what Africa's success looks like. You cannot change it. You have to do new.
I love it. I love it. And Barry Dewalski asks a very good question on Twitter. And if you want to ask a specific question, it's BCX Disrupt, the hashtag. The question for the panel, if Africa is to rise in the 21st century and lead the fourth industrial revolution, we need our own Silicon Valley. And is it something that can happen? And what are the critical success factors that we need to converge for an African Silicon Valley? Technology runs through your blood, Ian. Is it a possibility? Is it something realistic that we can have Africa's own Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I fundamentally believe that it is. It's something we've been working on for 3 or 4 years with multiple parties. We really, really believe that if we bring together academia, commerce, and learning into one place to really drive that change, then the opportunity in this country to create a Silicon Valley that doesn't just look after Africa, but actually powers back up into the rest of the world is significant. I was having a conversation with GE earlier this week about creating a capability here that can service all parts of the GE empire. Anywhere in the world, if we create the right coding skills, the right coding capability, our core economics here work. Okay, labor is relatively cheap. If we can get the right skill set with that labor, and we have the imagination and the vision and the passion, we absolutely can make it happen.
Yeah. Rapelang, yeah.
To add on to what Ian is saying, that I think there's some critical things that we have to do that wouldn't have needed to have been done in sort of the US. And as an entrepreneur, I think the biggest issue is that our markets are very fragmented. So while we talk about billions of people being on the continent, it's very hard to find where they are to communicate and market to them. It's very hard to monetize and make them pay for services across the continent. It's very hard to deliver the goods and services if it's not digital, and that's what I mean by a market fragmentation. And it's not as organized as saying that if you do have a website and you do have something on your app store, people will find you. It's not nearly that organized to reach huge numbers. You're still very limited to a small niche market. So we need to do much more to organize the market if we're going to be able to allow companies to truly scale to the levels that they're able to achieve in other continents. And for that, I think we need to find other ways to organize markets. Maybe it's about commerce and even banks and the like, not looking at themselves as just providing financial services to a range of businesses, but recognizing the fact that they actually have a huge pool of commercial or enterprise customers. And maybe relationship managers in a bank shouldn't just be about the financial services to the customer, but it could be about knowing the startups that they have and they're supporting and how they're relevant to all the companies in their portfolio, and providing the market channel through the existing customer base of large organizations. That's, in my mind, one of the ways we need to in our own way, organize the market so that access is easier. Otherwise, the cost of customer acquisition is going to remain prohibitively high for most businesses to grow to scale.
And I'm going to come to you in a second, Will and Mike, but I love what Shana says as well, both of you. But she says you can't borrow from America. You can't take that blueprint and expect it to work on this particular continent. We have to birth something new on the continent of Africa. So I've got Will and Mike. Go ahead, guys.
First. So I've spent the last 3 years living in Silicon Valley, and I've got a perspective on this. Firstly, Silicon Valley does not have a monopoly on innovation. They do not. Innovation happens all over the world in all different centers, from Nairobi to Sydney to Tel Aviv to Potsdam. Innovation happens. Secondly, there's a lot of different nationalities in Silicon Valley, but what I've found, there's not a lot of diversity of thought. And diversity of thought is crucial to spurning innovation. I think there's more diversity of thought here and in Africa. So I think the raw ingredients for innovation is better here than in Silicon Valley. Now, why has Silicon Valley got all the successes it has? They've organized the money better. They've organized the way money flows to entrepreneurs and how you take risk better than any other market on the planet. And that's why a lot of the entrepreneurs go there. But they don't monopolize innovation anymore.
Will? So one thing I get from Silicon Valley is they're problem solvers. So here we're talking about money, and one thing they do good is solve problems. So without solving problems, no one makes money. So, so they solve problems in the form of an app or some type of digital service, whether it's hardware and software or the combination of both. They solve problems. So there's lots of problems here. So which means there's a lot of opportunities if you're a problem solver. And one thing that Africa should not do is say, we're going to bring the Silicon Valley of Africa. That's like, no, let's have a real earmark on what we're trying to do. I remember going to CGI or going to sustainability conferences and Coca-Cola and Pepsi saying, we need to meet the 2020 Millennium Goals. Right? Where people work in concert and in unison, in harmony, to solve big problems that you foresee in the future. So what is the real earmark where we want to see a successful Africa? Let's say 2040 is right, a real trajectory on where we want to see like the seed blossom into something. And are we taking from Silicon Valley, or are we taking success from what Africa already produced by saying, no, we're going to think bigger. We want to do New Egypt all across Africa. Why are you borrowing from some new shit in Silicon Valley when you have some old shit that surpasses all that shit? I would say part of my language is just like my old school, career where we say shit a lot. It's all throughout our songs.
That's all good.
So I would say New Egypt before I would say Silicon Valley of Africa. Right?
Love it. Love it. Malcolm, do you have anything further to add to this? Because I also have a question for you from Anne Seif, who asks, what would you encourage kids these days to spend 10,000 hours on?
Well, I was going to briefly weigh in on the Silicon Valley. So I grew up in a town called Waterloo in Ontario, Canada, which is the Canadian Silicon Valley, if I
Home
could
of
use
BlackBerry.
That. Home of BlackBerry. And if
Waterloo?
you...
Oh, shit.
Was, yeah.
Yeah.
I used to hang out with Jim Basili back there in the Rim days.
And there's two things that Waterloo had that all of these centers of innovation have. One is that it had a very, very good technical university. And in other words, it had a place where thinking and innovation got done, where money flowed to, where talent could come to. And secondly is to go back to my first point, Waterloo was a place where people from around the world went. Waterloo was not a home just for Canadians. It was a home for anyone who wanted to live in Canada and think in Canada and grow something and build something. And I used to walk around the campus. My dad was a professor. My father was not a Canadian. He was, in fact, almost no one on the engineering faculty was born in Canada. And if you looked at the students, my father only in 35 years of teaching engineering at Waterloo had a Canadian-born student once. Everyone else, they were almost entirely Indians or Asians of some kind, and Africans. So one of his finest grad students ever was a Nigerian. So a very, very brilliant Nigerian graduated from high school or from college in Nigeria, and decided he wanted to go to Canada. If you want to build something of equivalent here, that Nigerian or that Indian kid has got to, at some point, say, I'd like to come to South Africa, right? So one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, what will it take for that brilliant kid to want to come here? And maybe that has very little to do with technology. It might have something to do with culture, it might have something to do with, there are any number of answers to the question of what brings that person here. And that's a conversation you have to have among yourselves to sort of come up with a good answer to that.
Yeah, and a very interesting one. And the question on the 10,000 hours?
Oh, what should they spend their 10,000 hours doing? Oh dear, I think whatever brings them joy.
Xbox and PS4. Hey, play with Lego, absolutely. We've got a problem with this microphone over here, with Ian's microphone, guys, if you don't mind checking it out. You know, a lot of people are saying over here, and Malcolm, you just touched this on bringing the other expertise into it, but Rich Mulholland has said this, Overshen says this on Twitter, why does Africa draw the line in getting Western help? Why are we needing, outsiders outside of the continent to tell us how to create the future and what blueprint we need and the Silicon Valley that we need? But I believe we live in a world that is, we're all global, and any help that comes from whichever direction will benefit us. Is there a notion that you believe that we don't need to take the advice from Western nations? Why were you asking outsiders like yourselves about what we need to do? Should we not do it from the bottom up and ask the bottom up what we need to do to start this revolution that we're talking about?
Well, I just described how a first world country, Canada, built its expertise by drawing from what we would call back then third world countries.
Yeah.
I mean, when you walked around the campus of University of Waterloo, where my dad was teaching there, you saw, as I said, Indians, Africans, Chinese, people from less. So there was no, part of the beauty of that experiment was the people, Canadians didn't care where you came from. They cared only that you had something to offer and you wanted to be there, right? So I think it's better to ask the question much more broadly.
Yeah.
Than to say, do I want it from this part of the world or this part of the world? It doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Mike, your time in Silicon Valley, it's quite interesting what you were saying earlier. And what is your answer to that question? From Rich Mulholland, is why do we need to ask help from outside about creating our own destiny, our own Silicon Valley, when we should be creating and they should be taking from us? What's your thinking on that?
So I think success needs diversity and innovation, and it's proven that teams who are more diverse are more successful. And I also believe that organizations today, the successful ones are organizations who don't think of their boundaries as their salaried employees. And by definition, we're living in a very global world. So I don't think it's a question of should we or should we not take. It's about what do people want to do? Where do you go to get the best insight, the best research? And in today's sort of global, crowdsourced, gig-type world, that could be anywhere on the planet. And I don't think we need to have this artificial mindset about, well, there's an Africa boundary and we're not going to take help from outside Africa. We've got to take help from wherever it makes sense. And we should think more about how do we make our ingredients more diverse, because that will breed a better result and more success.
I think for me it also comes back to something I touched on in my talk about not trusting enough in the validity and legitimacy of our point of view. And I recall a particular story soon after I'd launched our first business, which is the mobile VoIP apps. And I was in New York listening to a talk by one of the Skype founders. And obviously Skype was the biggest sort of VoIP platform. And after his talk, I asked him the question as to why wasn't there a full Skype mobile VoIP app available on mobile phones. And he talked about how the operators wouldn't like it and it just wasn't a priority, but essentially that it wasn't important at the time. And this was about 2007. And that was for me the very first time I experienced this disparity and the importance of your perspective, because I was expecting this person to be much further ahead in valuing that mobile experience than I was, and I was so blown away. And I just couldn't believe it, and that enforced for me that imperative that we actually have undermined what we might be seeing and assuming that somebody else is probably more developed in that thinking or that idea without trusting it enough to actually start working on it ourselves and pushing forward with it.
Yeah. Where's Rich Mulholland, by the way? Where are you, Rich? Is he here? Well, there you go. Well, stand up, because I got your question wrong, and I want to hear your question because it's a great question to the panel. So shout out. Is there a microphone that you can get to Rich over there and get him a question, because you've got a great question. And this is the guy that ruffled a few feathers earlier with his presentation about the fourth industrial revolution. And Will, he swore more than what you did. Yeah. So you got to...
Yeah, good.
Right, Rich, go ahead.
Aki, what I'm saying is that we have very, very smart people on the stage, and we're limiting the conversation to a conversation about tech in Africa.
Right.
Whereas what I think we can learn from, we're smart enough in this room to extract smart stuff from what they're saying. They could talk about anything clever, and we'd figure out how we can apply that to Africa. And I find that just narrowing the conversation down to such a small topic area limits the thinking that we can learn to opinion. But if we ask these guys what keeps them awake at night and what gets them exciting, then we can learn from that and apply that to what keeps us awake at night.
Yeah. Okay, good call. Well, this kind of leads to the next boom. That's how he rolls.
No,
man.
he did that yesterday.
That's how he rolls.
Drops nuggets.
So the question is, can we compete? Can we compete with all of this change? Can we get to the level where, the Chinas, the Japans, the US are in the world that we're living in? Are we able to get to that level? Can we get to that level?
I thought we were supposed to be talking about.
You can talk about that as well. Well, let's talk about that, because that was leading into the next one. So, what keeps you awake at night? Let's go with Richard's question. What keeps you awake at night?
You want me to say?
Yeah,
First?
I want to hear what keeps you awake at night. What scares you about the world that we're living in today?
What scares me, or what? I don't know whether scare is the right word. I was saying earlier during that the press thing I was doing that problems that have a technical basis don't scare me. They excite me. I think we'll solve them. Human problems are the harder ones. And I've often thought, that my objection to the Silicon Valleyists of the world is they solve technical problems and then think they've solved human problems. And of course they haven't. They've in fact only really solved the easiest part of the equation. Technology is simply a tool, and that's the easy thing. The hard thing is building societies that know how to use them, and know how to use them fairly, and know how to distribute their benefits, and know how to think clearly about the implications of some new, when autonomous vehicles come along, we have a lot of hard thinking to do about how quickly do we want to use them? What are we going to do with the people who are put out of work by them? How are we going to integrate them into, how are we going to use them to reimagine what an urban environment is like? There's a million, those are the really interesting, important questions. Those are the questions that keep me up at night. And I think the people who solve those human questions are the ones who are really going to have an advantageous position. Ultimately, the technology will just be a commodity. That's not the game you want to be in. If you're someone who can understand how to use it and create a model for somebody else, then I think you've got something.
Yeah. Mike?
So I think as a leader, one of the things which I am always stay awake over is how do I create and maintain a sense of purpose? Because I fundamentally believe purpose is key to everything. If you have the right sense of purpose in your organization, at a national level, in a team level, in a group level, 70% of the battle is won. The biggest challenge today, and I really enjoyed the presentation this morning, is this dynamic around, the bots are coming, AI is here, what's that going to do? That's the biggest challenge to maintaining purpose, because in the workplace today, certainly in more G20 countries, the biggest issue in the workplace is the fear of obsolescence. And it's almost counter to the whole way you need to have strong purpose and create purpose. So how you maintain that, and the comment that we're going to hit this inflection point where, kind of, trust me, it's going to be all right, we'll hit that inflection point, is a bit of a hard sell in the environment. So I think that, to me, is what it's all about. Picking up Malcolm's point, it is about the people stuff. It is about maintaining and as a leader, creating purpose and helping people to find that purpose, which is going to be more and more challenged as AI and technology advances at the pace it is.
Is that what keeps you up awake at night, Will?
I have two things that keep me up at night. One is, so if my company can create an AI, that means there's other AIs that are being created, and soon you'll have cognitive thinking machines. And are machines going to execute, are they being built the same way we look at the world? So that means you're going to have racist AIs. Hold on, wait. That shouldn't be funny. That should be the scariest shit in the world. For self-driving cars with Oculuses on them that have your facial recognition to know how much money you make, and it has to, not get in an accident, and you're worth X amount of dollars versus the person that's in the car whose life is saved. Now, why do we want a future that way? And how are we making sure the algorithm treats every human as an equal, not based on color, not based on income? So these things keep me up at night, but I get to go to work and make sure our developers are creating our platform that treats every human equal. Second thing that keeps me up at night is we have employees that have families, people coming from Bangalore, India to work in Hollywood, people coming from China, people coming from Israel. And so when you see folks coming to work for your company with families moving to another country with a company you started, seeded with your money, that's a whole different responsibility. How do you continue to raise money to pay for your overhead? Like $1 million was a lot of money to me in the projects. We spend more than that a month just to keep the lights on and pay our employees. So we retain our talent. And once our stuff is launched, how do we keep our talent? Because here come the poachers. Here come the Googles and the Apples and the Amazons. Just like we poach people from Amazon and we poach people from Google DeepMind and poach people from Apple, people are going to poach our talent. So how do we retain our talent? What's the culture of the company that we're starting? Right? A platform that could be used in this content and for people to build other companies on. That stuff keeps me up at night. But what keeps me proud to go to work every day with a smile on my face is when we get a stamp from people like Deutsche Telekom, a stamp from people like Mark Benioff and Salesforce that are using our platform. So the keeping up at night is, I've been up at night. It's called performing and touring. So it's not, it's not disheartening. It doesn't discourage me to keep on going. But it's important, the work that we do, to inspire the next workforce of tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Will. Thank you very much. A round of applause, please. Rapelang, and what is it that keeps you up awake at night? And I'm also going to add something that Will touched on as well, and you touched on as well, and the fact that there isn't enough women inclusion in the tech industry to disrupt and to drive these changes going forward. There aren't enough women. What do we need to do to create that opportunity and create more women in this particular workspace? And what keeps you awake at night?
Oh, sure thing. Well, now that we're approaching summer, I think the mosquitoes might keep me up. But more seriously, I think what keeps me up at night is the nearly sort of 50% of South Africans that still live on less than 3,500 rands a month. Because I think social inequality will get us far sooner than artificial intelligence. And in trying to unpack how we help or develop people in that instance, there's an organization locally called the ATV Transformation Movement, and they've done some studies where they assessed that about 84% of adult South Africans continue to live in a dependent mindset, where essentially they're operating from an external locus of control, where essentially you're believing that you can't effect changes in your life and everything is happening to you. And the consequences of that and how it constrains their thinking and their ability to solve their own problems sort of going out. And for me, trying to understand how we shift that is very, very important. And these are the non-knowledge skills that I'm most interested in, because it's not more training on entrepreneurship that's going to help us. We need to be able to understand how do you shift someone from a dependent mindset to an independent mindset? How do you shift them from an external locus of control to an internal one? And if we don't understand the neurobehavioral science around that, we're not actually going to be able to enable people to help themselves. Because I also don't believe that we can save people per se. Even if we're well-intentioned and well-educated and with resources, you can't, it's not sustainable. The world has proven that. And people need to be in a better position to save themselves. And for that, they need a stronger mindset.
Wow. Inspirational stuff. You've got a hell of a task on your hands, and I don't want to ask you about the balances and the pressure that CPOP puts you under that keeps you awake at night, but as a Chief Executive Officer at BSCX, this is a pivotal conference that's really going to inspire a lot of people, but what keeps you awake at night?
Other than my two boys, who tend to keep me awake at night, I guess it's the pace and agility that we need to both create and maintain to drive the changes that are required to fundamentally to create a difference. And people, all of us in this room, can be so change adverse. It's how we bring people with us on that journey and remove some of those fear issues that actually get in the way of us getting that pace and agility in place. That's probably the one big thing that keeps me awake at night. I think back to several of the other comments we talked about, technology is just a commodity and that doesn't worry me, sure. But I think the ability of technology just to make humanity a commodity worries me. And we've got to really understand how is technology beginning to affect our relationships with each other, and that's a key concern as well.
I'm going to ask each of the panelists to end off by giving us your 30 seconds of sage advice that you can give to everybody in this room to take away with them from this conference on the disruption, on the innovation, and what is your advice to dealing with this change or incorporating it in your life, or accepting it, and how to open up your mindset to innovate and bring this change that we so desperately need in our country. Mike?
So I would start with saying diversity is fundamental. Promote diversity, build diversity around you. There's always smarter people than yourself. The more you can put around you, the more successful you'll be. And secondly, I would say whatever happens, whatever challenges you face, whatever dynamics you're in, be yourself, be authentic. If you can embrace diversity and be authentic in whatever venture you're embarking on in life, I think it's the fundamental recipe for success.
Will?
I haven't finished thinking.
Okay. Well, we're going to go to Malcolm because Malcolm thinks quickly. Malcolm, before you answer that, you've got a fascinating discussion tomorrow, which I'd love to tell us a bit about it as well after you answer this question, because the masterclass tomorrow is going to be amazing.
Don't raise the bar too high.
No, we've got high expectations. But your 30 seconds of changing the world, thinking differently, innovating. What's your advice to the audience?
My advice would be pay attention to your attention. So the most important thing you have is your attention, is the time you spend, what you choose to attend to in the time you have to attend to things. And you have more options, more people vying for your attention than ever before. And a lot of that is a waste of time. And I think people should take their attention more seriously. I mean, if you just look at the amount of time, and I'm the biggest offender, that we waste staring at our little phones, just think that is of all the things we can do in the world, that is what we're choosing to do. It strikes me as a tragedy if that's what we end up being.
Wow. Wow. And a sneak preview on tomorrow's Malcolm Gladwell's masterclass tomorrow. What can we expect?
Two kind of serious talks, and then one long digression.
Wonderful. Rapelang,
Sure, I realized
30 seconds.
I realized I didn't answer your other question about women in tech. So
Yes.
a quick snippet on that.
Give us both. Give us both shots.
Yes, I think we will be able to have a more inclusive environment in technology when we stop sort of seeing software as this more mechanical thing and realize that it's much more of a form of expression. Ultimately, software, you're manifesting a perspective. You're manifesting a point of view of the world. And if you realize that women have been doing that all along, just possibly more in other industries, in fashion, in cooking. Those are manifestations of an expression, and software is ultimately one of the cheapest ways, actually, to manifest your expression. And if I think that way is communicated to women, it will be a lot more accessible. Then the departing point for you guys is, you know, when you go out into your world tomorrow, I think it can always be very overwhelming to sort of get started. And the most important thing for me that I always try to remember is that you'll never get to the point where you feel that you're ready or that you're experienced enough or that you're smart enough. And the best thing that you can do is to start one little step just as you are, with what little you have, in what little context you have, and that is the most important thing that you can do.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you very much. Will?
Right now is the most important time to be alive. And there's an urgency for this whole entire continent. And they should race towards being a part of solving it, like their existence depends on it. Because the next, it's not going to be 100 years behind the next loop. We're moving so fast that we have to, I say we like I'm from here, because I am, I just don't know which part. It's just a product of being American. We have to protect 9-year-olds and have a 20-year earmark on when and what success looks like. And I guarantee you, if that is what we commit to and encourage them to have an imagination, that imagination will spawn and birth a whole new way of living if we do it correctly. And it should be the most important thing that we do leaving here, is when you go home and you have a niece, a nephew, a son, or a daughter, you look at that 9-year-old like that is our savior, and we are supposed to protect them. And we're supposed to build and encourage them, because that is, what it's going to look like in the future, these leaders. And today's big businessmen and governments of countries, that should be their thing too. Whether you're a community village leader or a mayor or a president of a country, or a parent or a neighbor, that should be the whole force. And whether it's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, those are the ingredients. We know it. How do we apply it? And you do that by surrounding these kids like a force field. There's no other way. Everything else is just like hypotheticals, business, and what you're going to have is, unfortunately, you'll be number 3 or letter C to the leaders that will continue to lead. You have to say, we're not letters, we're not numbers, we're symbols now. @ signs, because that's where it's at. Exclamation, because I'm excited. Hashtags, because people are going to follow. Not 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, that's old school. Symbols, be symbolic and iconic, and protect the youth.
That's a tricky one to follow, so I guess very simply, I don't think the opportunity in front of us has ever been greater. I don't think the opportunity in front of us has ever been faster to access. And it's ours to lose, so let's go and use it.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for the panel. Rapelang Rabana, Ian Russell, Mike Ettling, Malcolm Gladwell, ladies and gentlemen, and will.i.am. Put your hands together, please. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you, Malcolm.